What's up, fellow tubers? We meet again after another long-awaited Summer Games Fest. Not gonna lie, this year felt like the definition of mid to me. And I don't think it was just the death of E3 proper, or the fact that more and more major showcases are going purely digital. It's another case like 2019, where the vast majority of high-profile releases either already came out this year, or aren't coming out until next year. And the lower profile stuff were things we've seen multiple years in a row. None of which is something I'm going to blame on anybody in particular, but because of it, I don't have as much energy to bring to the conversation as I usually do. This year I chose to focus my personal presentation on things that got a strong reaction out of me, or I can see myself looking back into someday. Let's start with the PlayStation Showcase. If I'm completely honest, normally Sony's Directs just can't muster up anything I'm personally invested in. But this year, they had one of the best conferences I think we've seen. Starting strong, hosting solid variety, and ending on easily the most gratuitously detailed trailer of this year's Summer Games Fest. Phantom Blade Zero! Looking like the best Samurai Ronin action movie made playable. We got wall running, we got whacking guys with both the sword and the sheath, we got decapitation chain flails, and we got giant Chinatown Silk Dragon boss fights. Sword of the Sea took Journey and Abzu, mashed them together using a swapping realities mechanic reminiscent of Skyward Sword's Ghost Ship, but good this time, and added hoverboards. Foam Stars! Competitive gaming really isn't my bag, but Splatoon has the right idea by giving the player more to do than just shooting people in the face. And expanding to the third dimension with foam rather than ink has a lot of potential counterplay scenarios that I'd be down to explore if I were to play it. Beat Saber Queen. Next up, I think an underrated aspect of the whole E3 hype cycle has as much to do with simply sharing our love of this multifaceted medium and the different branches that make it tick, as it is learning about the next big thing that'll empty your wallet, whether you end up enjoying it or not. Throwing a few extra songs at these rhythm games every year isn't worth making such a big deal about, but I'm enjoying listening to the song during a direct regardless. Even though I didn't verbally announce in such a way that I could play the live reaction for you, I was putting together the pieces that this might be Kraven before we got to Spidey's big entrance. Nor did I react all that much when Venom and Miles being playable were presented as features, because frankly, those are the obvious progressions for this franchise in my mind. What was varying levels of insane and awesome was the fact that they didn't just show the fight between Peter and Kraven's goons, they just casually showed off one of the longest, most complex mission encounters in this series during a press conference reveal. That means they're either super cocky, or they just have so much packed into Spider-Man 2 that they can show this and still have more for the players to get excited about. And if that's the case, I think we can all agree that's exciting. The Jeff Fest has managed to be sufficiently hyped the last few years that it's happened, and seeing Elden Ring last year was an amazing finisher for the primary showcase. So the way this year up-fronted its heavy hitters wasn't the greatest pacing, but the good stuff was pretty good. Speaking of which, I probably should have known this was coming, considering all the rumblings that have been going on for the last several years. But seeing Prince of Persia come back after so long as a Metroidvania with some sick-looking action mechanics, no less, was the kind of surprise reveal that makes it worth the extra effort to go in these conferences blind. Street Fighter Cross Exoprimal, on the other hand, was just kind of there. So much time invested in Smash Brothers roster discussion has left me with a weird fascination for crossovers. This one isn't that notable because it's an in-house crossover and it's just robots standing in for Street Fighter characters in this new IP. But there's also a novelty to see Street Fighter characters fighting from this over-the-shoulder point of view. Dead by Daylight. Nicolas Cage appearing for this is hilarious, but Keanu Reeves he ain't. And considering the role he plays in this multiplayer PvP game, his likeness being added is not a substantial addition. Sonic Superstars. I know this isn't the Sonic Mania sequel people were hoping for, but from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty good. Solid fusion of 3D era art style with classic era character designs, reworking the Wisp style power-ups to come from the Chaos Emeralds, and a return of Sonic 1's bonus stages. It's a little weird to realize that there hasn't been a 4-player Sonic game, considering how attached this fanbase is to its cast of characters, regardless of screen time or development. But between this, Frontiers, and the movies, it looks like Sonic's finally firing on all cylinders again. Sandland. Yo! Early Dragon Ball style open world adventure that's not attached to the Dragon Quest or Dragon Ball IPs? Let's go! I'm still hoping there's more to it than just the combat that was shown, but the combination of human-scale beat-em-up gameplay and mech-scale missile destruction gameplay still looks fun. Throne and Liberty. This starts out looking like a cool action fantasy game with animal transformations that synergize with grappling hook mobility. And then you realize it's an MMO, and my interest plummets. Still looks really good, just not my cup of tea. Yes, Your Grace. Haven't heard of this game before, and even though it's apparently an expansion, not the original game, it looks like a really cool take on a management sim focusing on the political governing aspect of kingship rather than warfare, construction, or romanticized personal achievements. Spider-Man 2! Spider-Man 2 showing up here is a bit superfluous considering that gigantic trailer we got in the Sony Direct. But it's cool to see how far they plan on going with making this version of Spider-Man its own thing. Curious to see if they create an original character, or simply settle for a particularly novel existing character to make Venom feel unique in this setting. Pal World! This video somewhat downplays how dark this setting is, focusing more on gameplay than the type of world building, which would further emphasize the animal cruelty, oppressed natives angle they've gone with for the majority of their trailers. It looks so much like what I want Pokemon to be, but knowing what they intend it to be, I just can't. Return to Moria. This feels disappointingly underwhelming. Now that we've seen more of what the gameplay is actually like, it seems they're going a mobile game base defense style building rather than the 3D dwarf fortress it could have been. But it still has some potential, so I remain cautiously optimistic. Under the Waves. Subnautica left a hole in my backlog that I'm still feeling every time I wander through a water level. And I really wish this could fill that hole. But it's clearly drawing more from the action horror of Soma than Subnautica's building survival. It's still a cool looking ocean game, which is why I'm sharing it. I just wish I was talking about Subnautica 3, I guess. What are you even doing? This isn't even the Microsoft showcase. Get your car out of here. Space Trash Scavenger. Ooh. is this Space Engineers with more color, combat mechanics, and possibly a campaign with mechanical progression? Sign me up! Day of the Devs! Nothing terribly interesting to say about this showcase. It's the same one that it's clearly been running for the last 10 years, and it kind of just is a stream of devs showing off their content. Cuphead! Man, these guys always have the best trailers. And to think, just a few years ago, they were worried it might not pay off because of all the delays. Now they're successful enough to have a TV show, and their game has physical copies! Looking forward to what they do next. Beastie Balls. And on your left, you'll see yet another Pokemon clone. Thankfully enough, this one has the unique premise of also being a turn-based sports title, based on volleyball. Really like how this leans into Pokemon's tendency to create monsters that might be better suited to sports with a particular focus rather than all-out brawling. This example has some solid designs, and I'm a sucker for real-time action games being made turn-based. Hyper Like Breaker. Well, this is a shift. Hyper Light Drifter has a very distinct pixel art style. And while they duplicated the color palette and the general look of everything successfully, I feel like something was lost in the process of converting to 3D. It still looks great, and the combat looks like it's been properly expanded by the extra access. Just an awkward transition is all. Viewfinder! Yes, more trippy perspective physics-based puzzle games descend into madness! Also, can't help but think of these toys from my childhood when hearing that title. Henry Halfhead. What even is this game? Mechanically, it's just a possess any object game. But narratively, his entire body is the top half of a head. Even without the narrator, it's kind of a weird concept. And if the narrator is part of it, not just here for the showcase, it bumps up from gimmicky to outright indie gem. Okay, so this is a dumb personal distinction, but when I saw this during the Sony Direct, I couldn't bring myself to get invested, because the title hinting at either gods or the drama related to immortality. Now that I know that's just an in-universe military title, and it's more Call of Duty with magic, I'm kind of into it. I don't think the magic looks as cool as, say, Witchfire, but it still offers magic FPS in a setting I might be able to tolerate. Fortnite Wilds. Fortnite continues to absorb everything into its barely meaningful but irrefutably impressive crossover. The fact that they had to shrink Optimus Prime down to human size instead of produce a seasonal gimmick that works around his canon size says a lot about the level of care and meaningfulness of participating in this crossover, but it does make for a neat character skin. Ete. There's so many of these games where you color a drab or whited out landscape, bringing life back to the world at this point, that there really ought to be a universal genre name for it. I'm thinking paint to life. Dig the art style and the creation tools, just need more info on the collection gameplay loop that's hinted at midway through. Retro Gadgets. I won't say this is a novel concept for a tinkering puzzle-solving game, but it has a particular sense of style that helps distinguish it. The creation tools look really robust, and check out these microgames. Mars First Logistics. Speaking of tinkering puzzle games, while Tears of the Kingdom, and by extension Nuts and Bolts, are still on people's minds, and therefore the primary point of comparison people will make with this game, the desert and space aesthetic reminds me of Star Wars Droid Works, which I dug as a child. I doubt this will recapture that particular flavor of magic, but between the variety of droid parts on display and this bit here, I don't know if I want to finish it, but I do want to play it. Devolver Digital's show wasn't as long or jam-packed as usual, but the snarky satire was just as potent as usual, making fun of the Sonic franchise and fanbase, the tendency for mascot platformer revivals to be used to promote something more corporate, and the current buzz surrounding AI-generated content. And before that, they had a whole run with this beautifully 90s Sonic-esque bumper pre-show, during which they showed trailers for games not fitting into the script of the direct proper. Blink Sword! This is nothing if not a novel idea for a Souls-like. 2D sprites in a 3D pixel art world. Need to see more of the gameplay because the combat by itself was simply fine. But the writing segment has me thinking there's more secondary gameplay loops to the game than usually associated with Souls-likes, which could elevate it to something special, if still niche. Karmazoo! Indian art-style puzzle platformer built around using different animal skills in cooperation. As someone who mostly plays alone, it's not exactly what I'm into at the moment, but there's so much creativity and variety on display, I'd be down to play it at a party. Then there's the main Devolver Direct. The entire scenario surrounding Balvi is morbidly hilarious. Even without the science fantasy aspect of the machine gaining sentience and turning on the corporate stooges, the idea of bringing in the original creator of an IP just to promote a live service AI generator that barely has the faintest connection to the IP is so beautifully, painfully real. As for the science fantasy elements, I'd say it was unnecessarily gruesome, but that is par the course for these Devolver Directs. Wizard with a gun! Sweet! More Wizard with a gun gameplay! Glad it really does have survival and crafting aspects, while still having a robust combat system. I'm somewhat disappointed the environmental building branch of the gameplay boils down to plopping a bunch of crafting stations on the ground in a barely organized fashion, but I suppose there's always hope for DLC, the way Don't Starve did it. The Future Game Show! I guess this is what I get for ignoring credits most of the time. I was not at all aware the voice of Spider-Man also voiced freaking Sasuke Uchiha. Anyways, Yuri and Laura are greatest hosts with lots of amusing banter. Steel Seed is an interesting take on dystopian apocalypse. Not so much evil robots as robots behaving sensibly in the face of human stupidity. Looks like a fun sneaking and climbing game with a particular sense of scale. En garde! Lady Zorro the game is already pretty novel in this trailer, but I've seen the demo played, and there's some really fun movie action tropes that are seamlessly incorporated into the combat system, both practically and stylistically. Not a lock, but I do want to play this. Alaskan Road Trucker, the place where the business management sim and the truck simulator intersect. Dig the look of this trailer, presenting a thief able to jump into books to steal literary items. Having seen gameplay elsewhere, it's not the 3D action stealth title it appears to be, but the Disco Elysium style RPG with a more fantasy twinge has me intrigued. The Grand Getaway! I was never into Wallace and Gromit, so that IP getting a game is not a big deal to me on its own. But the fact that the trailer is in the franchise's signature claymation style gives me hope for an adventure game in the vein of The Neverhood, which would be really freaking cool if they pulled it off. Crossblitz! Here's another bonkers mix. Some kind of deck-building, hexagon, roguelike, tactics RPG with possible routing elements. And if you understood all of that, maybe try and explain it to me, because I said it and I still barely follow. We've seen a lot of Warhaven trailers this Summer Games Fest. This one makes it look like For Honor with Cadillacs and dinosaurs. I leave it up to the viewer to determine whether that's an improvement or not. Rough and the Riverside. Papercraft-style action-adventure with a mechanic of transferring the color texture between different objects to change what each material is made of, and a Disney's Gummy Bears vibe to the world. Instant lock. Rekka! Not only is it a witchy-themed buildy sandbox, but it's got the added feature of the structure being carried around by a giant chicken torso. Forget the mythology, I just like that idea on principle. Add it to the list. Pacific Drive. Because I've only started driving IRL in the last few years, I've only recently started to appreciate the unique appeal of racing games. They still don't offer the kind of content that has much staying power for me personally. A driving game with survival elements, and set in my backyard of the Pacific Northwest, sounds like the ideal entry in the genre for my taste. I might even learn some things I'm desperately ignorant about cars. The Spirit of the Samurai. Now this is the kind of game you end a showcase with. Ominous narration, stylish action gameplay, character swap puzzles, and genuinely creepy claymation monsters? Sign me up! Tribeca Games. Just like the Day of the Devs, this very solid collection of games comes with some insights from the devs that made them. I'll admit it's not the most entertaining thing, unless you're already invested in the game itself, but it's really good to hear from the artists that make the art, no matter the medium. A Highland Song. This looks like a cute exploration platformer in the same vein as A Short Hike, with a little more heavy coming of age in the background. Art style's neat too. Chance of Savar. Really solid setting for a puzzle game, mixing in logic-based brain teasers and communication-based problems. It definitely looks like a unique mix. Nightscape. This is a really cute action side-scroller, themed around bringing constellations to life. Think I'll want to see more of it to really get invested, but the concept is a nice start. Desplote? Desplote? Then there's this unconventional title about trying to convey the feelings and energy of South America's love for football from the perspective of a child kicking around a ball in the neighborhood. It's so weird, and I won't pretend to be overly enthusiastic about the gameplay, but avant-garde ideas like this are how we push the medium forward. The Wholesome Games Direct. This year's Wholesome Games Direct didn't seem to have as much of a budget as last year's. No special animation, and no time to stop and rest. But there was plenty of great games shown off here. I Am a Caterpillar is a very unique exploration collection game with a three-dimensional wrap-around environment like the Mario Galaxy games, but set in a forest playing as a caterpillar that doesn't want to become a butterfly. Could turn out to be the newer, more approachable Snake Pass, with an uplifting message about being yourself. Frog Song! Not enough gameplay in this trailer to get a real good feel for it, but they seem to be going for a top-down action-adventure counterpart to Hollow Knight. If it's even half that good, it should be pretty great. But clearly someone missed a memo, because last year was the Frog year. Bubblegum Galaxy. What even is this game? The only gameplay we see is hexagonal Carcassonne, but this world is in the same realm as Katamari Damacy for bizarre character designs and personalities. And if this office section has any role in the gameplay, this could be so much more than that description lets on. Moonstone Island. This one looks like just another fantasy farm sim following the crowd of Stardew Valley imitators most people are getting tired of. But then it introduces card game turn-based combat, monster raising, and flying on brooms. So it's got a little to set it apart. Able Gamers. Okay, now we're getting into the wholesome part of the Wholesome Direct. Not just talking about the Able Gamers organization, but bringing on a spokesman to promote gaming design with true accessibility is a direction to be respected and emulated. Shmush Come Home. On the one hand, super creepy, because mushrooms, and even dropping facts about real-world mushrooms just makes me think of cordyceps. On the other hand, cute 3D exploration game with paraglider. Can't decide if it's a nope or a lock. Demba got some beats and a release date. Surmount. Oh gosh, someone took the DK King of Swing gameplay and made an original IP out of it. I'm happy to see something so niche and obscure get another chance to shine, but it's such a wonky mechanic. Tiny Sticker Tale. So this game looks fine, a solid gather the items to solve puzzles adventure game, but between the art style and the gameplay being contextualized as stickers, I can't help revisiting the modern Paper Mario would be good if it were some other IP discussion. This game is certainly helped by not being burdened with the legacy of Paper Mario, but it also just does more with its ideas than modern Paper Mario. In the few clips we get, you can see the stickers being freely placed throughout the environment. And while not clearly stated, it seems to be implied the puzzles aren't single solution, which is ultimately the problem with modern Paper Mario. Bottom line, modern Paper Mario is overrated by its defenders, and you should try this if you really like stickers. Everdeep Aurora. Play as a cat with all the sneaky climbing goodness that entails, with block removal gameplay and multiple alternate gameplay minigames. Set in old school Game Boy Color art style, yeah, I want to play that. Kibu. Another farming sim to add to the pile. Even the Tanuki player character and traditional Japanese aesthetic aren't, strictly speaking, original, but it is pretty rare to merge the foraging exploration gameplay of, say, Breath of the Wild with a Harvest Moon farm builder, unless you're going full Minecraft clone. Might want to know more about the roles these spirits play, as this trailer is pretty sparse on the narrative setup, but overall I dig it. Magical Delicacies, Kiki's Delivery Service, reframed as a young adult cooking meals and delivering them around town Metroidvania style. Sign me up. Little Friends! It's Nintendogs. I'm really not interested at all, I just had to bring it up because this is not the first game, even in this Summer Games Fest, where Nintendo simply refuses not only to make new versions of old IPs, but to bring ports of old games to the Switch. And because of that, an indie studio came and did it for them. Welcome to Townseek. This is such a whimsical art style that I can't help coming back to it. The first couple of viewings, I couldn't sort out what the primary loop was, but it seems to legitimately be a bartering sim. There's just not enough information to really see how deep it goes. Also cute is how you can have all these indie characters following your airship for the overworld, but not sure how that plays into the primary loop. Feed All Monsters. A routing puzzle game based on feeding a whole group of monsters in one go. I can appreciate that. Manita's Kitchen. The joke is that it's a cooking sim as a baby T-Rex, a species known for their disproportionately short arms. Not much else to say. Botany Manor. They're really blending together now. I swear I saw this one last year, but that was Garden Inn, which was actually limited to a room-by-room perspective versus this full-rendered mansion interior. Not sure where this one's going, though. Most of the gameplay seemed entirely separated from the contents of the elaborate mansion, and then the trailer ends with a camera that makes plants grow. Really just got to see more before making any judgment. Solarpunk! It's always nice to see an optimistic view of the future, where technology can be made to blend with nature instead of the world devolving into oppressive dystopias and dark, smoggy megacities. This is yet another farming sim, but it's set on a floating island where you can ride around in airships. For me, it's outshined by a similar game in a later conference, but it doesn't look bad. While the Iron's Hot. Among all the farming and crafting sims, there's a smaller niche that considers mechanical interactive nuances of forging and crafting items through a process more involved than simply using the resources necessary to craft a thing as an alternative currency. There's not enough here to say this is a particularly amazing example of that, but I really dig the trailer's music syncing with the hammer strikes. Tiny Bookshop. It's weird. When I was growing up, books were a much bigger part of my life. But these days, as much as I champion physical media, I'm just not as into books as I once was. Most printed fiction and non-fiction I consume is through easily digestible, low-commitment fan fiction and quick tutorials or fact checks on Google. All that to say, this seems like a novel example of the shop sim genre. I like how there's both the cart itself and furniture you can organize outside. It's just not hitting me personally as hard as I want it to. Sopa! I kept waiting for some Dia de las Muertas iconography to pop in, considering how consistently the US fixates on that particular myth. But it refreshingly never came. This seems more like the Mexican equivalent to Venba, and I can appreciate that. Kato! A game where you can combine toast and cat for anti-gravity. You crazy goose, I'm in. Toaster Ball. So, it's not exactly Rocket League in that it's not an arcadey racer spiced up with the rules and objectives of a traditional sport, but I feel like tennis where toasters replace the rackets is following a similar design premise. OTK Games. This was one of the more unique conferences, the feel of which probably comes from the transition to digital only rather than live stage shows, but it feels even more like professional YouTuber ascending to deliver sponsored game announcements than the PC gaming show. Which, for the record, isn't a bad thing. Personally, I thought it was cool of them to not only have interviews with the creators, but have a group breakdown of the different reveals organized by genre and discuss details the average viewer might have missed on initial impressions. All that considered, the sponsored Transforming Mech PC commissioned for the conference was kind of over the top, but in an OMG, that's so cool kind of way, and not a why is there a car at my games conference way. Toxic Crusaders. I swear some corporate exec saw Revenge of the Shredder doing the rounds and looked at the IPs they had ownership of. Because who honestly remembers Toxic Crusaders? We're gonna get Street Sharks next? The Tick? Tattooed teenage alien fighters from Beverly Hills? Although I do like the idea of a Street Sharks one, let's do that. Slave Zero X. Remember what I said about PS1 era recreations last year? I didn't even make the connection the first time I saw this, but there it is. Early 3D polygonal backgrounds and character models, but in a side-scroller because we haven't sorted out how to make 3D work perfectly yet. Action looks really slick too, with all sorts of dashes and juggling going on. And samurai robots. Should be a good time. Esophagize. Oh gosh, what even is this? I mean, I know what it is. It's a wonky controls traversal party game. But why is this direction someone went in? My Little Universe. Looks like Forager on a larger scale, and it sounds like they're implying a little dwarf fortress while we're at it, which is really cool if it's true. But it's worth keeping in mind, they didn't show any infrastructure that gives meaning to the idea of building your own civilization, which takes out most of the fun. The Engineer. Believe me, I love Minecraft, and all the games or game modes it's inspired. But I definitely wish there were more buildy sandboxes that used physics, so we can have the extra satisfaction of designing something that will last, despite contending with the challenge of outside forces we face in real life. What's even better is this one seems to have a legitimate economy, which is often where buildy sandboxes fail. Got to admit, I did not ask for the QWOP controls though. Guess it'll be hilarious to watch at the bare minimum. Mall Craze. Like Zoo or Roller Coaster Tycoon, this is such an oddly specific thing to want to design, but once you're on board, it can be oddly fun to design based on real places you've been, based on some fantastical vision of an impossible place, or just design the most efficient location based on the parameters established in the game. Checkmate Showdown. They did it! They turned chess boxing into a fighting game with extra steps. The way these two ideas contradict and complement each other is so weird that just as a PvP experience, it takes some doing to wrap one's head around. But the fact that it somewhat requires the use of every character in a given match helps alleviate the potential problem of the player base stagnating with certain characters. Will be interesting to see if they manage a compelling single-player mode, because then I might have to play it. Whisker Squadron! There it is again! Nintendo failed to deliver on an IP they've been hoarding and or absolutely botched due to certain higher-ups' obsession with gimmicks, so someone went and made it better. I'm not sure what the over-under is on the roguelike aspect of it, but Star Fox was always about being very arcadey, so I assume it's cool. Patrick Paradox. These Game Jam games are always ridiculously good for being put together in a weekend, and I'm always happy to hear that one of them has ascended to full game status. The box within a box is a pretty cool scenario for a puzzle game, so long as you enjoy block puzzles. First Dwarf. As a buildy sandbox, this one's pretty standard, but the action elements look decent, it has a fantasy mech, and a playable dragon. Night Foretold. This one's a pretty typical top-down action RPG, but the extra parkour aspect could become pretty special if the level design allows for it. Aloft. Okay, this is the buildy sandbox that I thought looked better than Solarpunk. Floating islands that are sometimes on the backs of giant floating critters? Check. Wall panels, as well as blocks for building? Check. Engineering-based contraptions? Check. Glider has maneuvering techniques? Check. You can build sails onto the islands and make them into the airship. Double check. Let's lock it down. The Microsoft Showcase. Here we go. The guys that owned enough IPs to make their own Smash Bros. Ultimate before they bought Activision. Let's see what they can dish out. Surely they haven't been resting on the laurels of Game Pass, and since we already got the car debut out of the way, they'll have more time to show off games other than Starfield. Right? Right? The Persona 3 remake is a nice announcement, but not nearly as cool as just getting Persona at all was last year. Flight Sim 2024 is getting a mission system, so there's even more incentive for me to maybe try that out someday. And OMG, even at a digital pre-recorded press conference, Forza debuts not one, but 2 cars during a video games conference. Path of the Goddess is neat, but you really can't tell from this trailer whether it's an action RPG like Dark Souls, or in this case Neo, a spectacle fighter like Devil May Cry, or maybe it goes real heavy into those NPC allies, venturing into its own special thing. But more than excitement for the gameplay, I just find it hilarious that Microsoft pulled this one away from Capcom, so they had nothing to show when their conference came around. Persona 5 Tactica! The number of people I've seen acting like Persona 6 should be right around the corner is amusing. This is how the franchise works. Atlus spends years building a very solid JRPG with an intricate world full of memorable characters, and milks that world with spin-offs for years to come, while working on the next game. What about this example? I don't know, I haven't gotten around to Persona 5 yet. Also, BTW, how did this come out before Metal Slug Tactics? Jusant. Man, it's one thing to say climbing exploration game set around cliff-dwelling cities. It's a whole next level to throw so many different types of climbing and ascension into the mix. Between genuine handhold rock climbing, moss, growing plants, rope-dangling wall run, and pre-established man-made handholds, it looks, if not flexible, then full of variety. Doesn't look like there's much more to it than that, so I don't know how into it I'd be, but I'm really glad it exists. Metaphor! Whoa, a proper high fantasy Shin 10 game. Tell me it has a fully functional derivative of the press turn system and some extra nuances during combat, and I'm in. Starfield! Space still does nothing for me as a setting. But between the jetpack firefight scenarios, the ability to build a ship, and the ability to build a base, I'm somewhat tempted to give it a shot. Also, the watch they announced in the middle was ridiculous. The PC Gaming Show! Ah, good old PC Gaming Show. Less biting satire, and more pure goofiness lampshade hanging than Devolver Digital, yet still celebrating the absurdities of modern gaming business and culture. I'd argue, all the bits about AI art are even more inspired and nuanced than Devolver's take, the deprecating humor of so bad it's good we can still get from this format, while acknowledging the less than savory side of corporate types trying to mass-produce art without artists. The part where Day 9 is replaced by Day 10 while unable to immediately veto the AI's takeover because of all the monetization features being added to social media platforms, and the reconciliation at the end for PC Gaming Show's tradition of dressing up in costume are the best bits. Teardown gets a creative mode. This kind of doesn't matter unless you're already invested in Teardown's core gameplay, but because its demolition gameplay is built around an aesthetic right out of Dream's creation system, it makes sense to add a mode to build sets for others to tear down. Ebenezer and the Invisible World. What even is this? A game based off of Charles Dickens' classic, A Christmas Carol, isn't entirely a stretch. But a Metroidvania, as Ebenezer Scrooge being powered by the spirits of Christmas and Tiny Tim, what were they smoking? It doesn't even look that impressive, with an entirely serviceable art style and gameplay that is the definition of mid. I would very much like for this to actually be good, but it really doesn't look it. Island of Insight. I don't like MMOs. I prefer to play by myself or at least in person. But this is like the ultimate puzzle game, doing practically everything from rolling blocks, to codexes, to Tetris, to environmental ink blots, to match 3. If it's even half as cool as it looks in practice, I'll probably have to play it out of sheer principle. Mariachi Legends! No game, no hype, but that little action animation near the end kind of counts. And a spectacle fighter in this Mexican folklore aesthetic is something we could stand to see more of. So a little hype? My Friendly Neighborhood. Lol. Now this is my kind of survival horror. The enemies are Muppets instead of your usual zombies/demons, and the primary gameplay involves rearranging inventories like Leon Kennedy. I can't say for sure that I'll love it, but I need to play it. Starforge. Look, it's StarCraft 3, Reign of Chaos. Of all the genres I bring up in these reaction videos, RTS are probably my weakest area of expertise. And yet, even I can tell this is more functional than revolutionary. It's still very good. The original creators of the War StarCraft franchises are going to make their own IP, and this will probably go very well by the time it's finished. But to beat StarCraft 2 at this point, you're gonna need a little more oomph. Bloomtown! Stardew Valley meets Persona, and one of the Personas is a T-Rex. This sounds like a recipe for success. The Ubisoft Showcase! As usual, Ubisoft walks a bizarre and fine line between being the quirky provider of such ambitiously fanciful titles as Sands of Time, Just Dance, and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, while being the obnoxious corporate community with less than savory leaders who just keep churning out Assassin's Creed and middling titles with a dead man's name plastered on them. Started out with the obligatory Just Dance showcase. I have no idea what the whole Olympic part of the discussion is, but the whole thing is amusing as ever. Next we got even more Prince of Persia, and if you weren't sure it was going to be a banger already, here's a whole bunch of spectacle fighter techie goodness to convince you. Skull and Bones, no game, no hype, but that song is fire. Speaking of no game, no hype, Rayman in Sparks of Hope is a hilarious skit, but like, what does he do? I'm avoiding spoilers because I haven't gotten to this game yet, but I'd make an exception to know how Rayman actually fits into the Rabbids tactics formula. Assassin's Creed. Man, I can't stand this setting anymore. The lore is just so not my cup of tea. But I have really fond memories of Assassin's Creed 1, and all these cool mechanics are everything I dreamed the series would be before I first played it. I guess weirdly enough, in this case, the backlog is actually protecting me from the obvious nostalgia bait. We'll see if it's still appealing in a few more years, and maybe I'll come back to this one. Grand Theft X-Wing is looking good for what it is. A little climby stuff here, a little blasting there, some opportunities to roleplay, and you get to fly spaceships directly into outer space, just like all the other games that already do that. If you still enjoy Star Wars after what Disney's done to it, this looks to be the best way to live in the Star Wars universe this side of the MMOs. The Capcom Showcase! Capcom, why? E3's dead. You didn't have to show up this year. You shouldn't have showed up last year. Yes, you have a website with game demos for the anniversary. And Mega Man X Life is one of the coolest gacha mobile titles I've heard of this side of Genshin Impact. But you didn't need a whole conference to show that off. Annapurna is a weird one, being another smaller publisher like Devolver, neither having the inclination to go into the same over-the-top farcical productions, or having the industry-wide reputation to stand on brand loyalty alone. They're both formal and informal at the same time. None of which matters all that much to me, because they stick to just showing off games. And they have quite a few good ones. Lorelei the Laser Eyes. We saw a lot of horror this year, and while I'm inclined to stay away, I do appreciate the way this trailer replaced letters with maze puzzles that end up resembling a runic alphabet. To a T! Such a wholesome and family-friendly portrayal of disabled individuals. It does kind of lean into disability superpower, but I like to think the overall message of not getting hung up on what makes you different from everyone else makes up for that. Flock! We started this Summer Games Fest with an Abzu Journey combo game way back in the Sony Direct. And now, we're getting a flower Pokemon combo where you soar through levels just chilling, but if you want to get extra critters, there's some nuanced mechanics to attract the different species to your flock. What intrigues me the most is that while the title conjures images of birds, they went out of their way to bring in floating sheep and whales, and I kind of want to play it just to see how much variety they managed to conjure up. Bounty Star! Dude, post-apocalyptic setting that follows a premise of humanity rebuilding after the disaster, while focusing on a personal story of healing in a mech garage management sim that's also an action game? Who needs Armored Core 6? Let's go! Nintendo Direct. I know Annapurna technically came before Nintendo, but Nintendo has more stuff I'm excited for, so I figured it would be a better way to finish off Summer Games Fest. Super Mario RPG Remake. Okay, for the record, I just bought Super Mario RPG on the Wii U eShop before Nintendo closed it. I've owned a SNES copy since it came out, and I was under the naively optimistic impression that this was already on the NSO. So all I could think while watching this was, if you're not going to give us new content, give us Thousand Year Door instead. Having said that, now that I've revisited the facts, even if it were on NSO, a hard copy is not a bad thing to have. Other than the UI, this remaster looks and sounds gorgeous, and the additions to the gameplay they seem to have made still could pan out in a way that breathes new life into one of my favorite games of all time. Peach Theater Game. This is such a weird thing to announce here with so little content revealed, because the setup could go either way, into being a 3D RPG interpretation of Paper Mario's old stage play content, or a puzzle adventure using theatrical effects. And I'm kind of down for both, but they didn't show enough to make a judgment either way. Arkham Trilogy! It's really weird that the Arkham Trilogy is getting ported this late into the game, but it's just another great feather in the Switch's cap that helps it close in on the PS2, not only in sales, but in legendary libraries. Hot Wheels Unleashed. Speaking of great games adding to the Switch's library, Because I don't regularly pay attention to the racing game scene, I forgot this existed, and thought it was a new title being announced for the Switch. Now that I know it's not, I still think it's cool that it's coming to the Switch. Luigi's Mansion 2 Remastered, and Pikmin 1 and 2 Shadow Drop. This is big news, because it's another GameCube 3DS remake, Shadow Drop, in the course of a few months. Regardless of whether you believe this is signaling the end of the Switch's lifespan, or you think Nintendo plans to pad the release cycle with GameCube 3DS remasters for the next few years, it means NSO isn't likely to get GameCube titles anytime soon, if ever. But it also means that Nintendo is planning to bring those titles to the Switch, which is very good news across the board. Penny's big breakaway. Looking over the footage for this year's Summer Games Fest, there's actually been a surprisingly solid lineup of collectathon platformers. But this one is easily the one that most gels with me, from the aesthetic, to the movement tech, to the music. The fact that it's made by the Sonic Mania team means it's almost guaranteed to be a banger. Easy addition to the list. Super Mario Wonder, not gonna lie, for the entire trailer, I was convinced this was a Super Mario Run sequel. It has a similar look, and the rating system reminded me of a mobile game. It's not new soup, and there's some very novel ideas in here, but far too many people have blown up what this game is out of proportion. Like modern Paper Mario, it's baby steps back to the status quo from a massive regression. And while the ability to glide without a power-up and the addition of the Wonder Flower are very solid additions that do the most to rethink how 2D Mario plays since the new soup stagnation began, I'd much rather they bring back the massive power-up selection, dynamic world maps, more varied level margins, and post-boss storytelling that made Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World so amazing. This is just an extra theme waiting to be added to Mario Maker. And so, another Summer Games Fest has come and gone. Let us take a moment of silence for the era of E3, which was well on its way to ending last year, but finally reached its final punctuation this year. The shift to mostly pre-recorded press conferences means we're even less likely to ever get such treasure moments as $2.99, you attack its weak point for massive damage, and you're breathtaking. But there's also some fun new ideas going around, like the Grasshopper Direct interrupting itself with ads for the trailers it's revealing. Even a year like this one, where I'm less enthusiastic about the big name announcements, and a certain amount of genre fatigue, makes it harder to get excited about the indie titles flowing through. There's some amazing titles peppered in here and there that will likely end up on my favorites list. Here's hoping you found something to be excited for, or at least something entertaining in all of this. Now I've got to go get back to this year's monster titles, Tears of the Kingdom and Elden Ring. So that request for knowledge of time dilation from last year, it still stands. Adios.